Tismiranchandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vācāram pangam langyate girim yat prapatamam vande Shri Gurudīnataranam Paramanandam Madhavam. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri. So we were Canto 4, Chapter 16, verse 11, which is the glorification of Prithu Maharaj by the Sutas. Durashado Durvisha Asanopi Vidurvat Neva Biva Vitam Sakyo Venaranya Uti Tunala. King Prithu was born of the dead body of King Vena, as fire is produced from arani wood. Thus King Prithu will always remain just like fire, and his enemies will not be able to approach him. Indeed, he will be unbearable to his enemies. For although staying very near him, they will never be able to approach him, but will have to remain as if away. No one will be able to overcome the strength of King Prithu. But in these sets of verses, King Prithu is being described as comparable in prowess to various devas. So previously he was compared to be like the sun, Vayu, Prithvi. Now he's been compared to Agni. So the sages, or rather the Sutas, one of their expertise is that they speak in a poetic way. So essentially what they are saying is that he will not be close to his evil enemies, which means that when he is close to his enemies will run away from him. He will be intolerable. The best of the enemies cannot tolerate him. And they are giving this analogy of how King Vena appeared from King Prithu appeared from the body of Vena, just like fire arises from arani wood. So by the chanting of the mantras, the qualified priests, they can invoke fire from arani wood. And Prabhupada says arani wood is a kind of fuel that used to ignite fire by friction. At the time of performing sacrifices, one can ignite a fire from arani wood. Although born of his dead father, King Prithu would still remain just like fire. Just as fire is not easily approached, King Prithu would be unapproachable by his enemies, even though they would appear to be very near to him. So there's a saying that says that you should keep your friends closer and your enemies closer. So when this phrase is used, they will be close to him, which means that he will be aware of the intention of his enemies, that he will be aware who they are, what they are planning. So that way they will be close to him, but he will be intolerable to them because he will be competent to vanquish them at every step of the way. Verse 12. Antarbahir chabhutana Pashyam karmani charane udasina evadaksho vayuratmeva dehina. King Prithu will be able to see all the internal and external activities of every one of his citizens. Still, no one will be able to know his system of espionage, and he himself will remain neutral regarding all matters of glorification or vilification paid to him. He will be exactly like air, the air force within the body, which is exhibited internally and externally, but is always neutral to all affairs. So here Prithu Maharaj is compared to Vayu. So Charane means that he will be, through his spies, he will be seeing everything. But yet Udasina, that yet he will be unattached. So though he will be attached to his servants and ministers, he will appear unattached because he will always act on dharma. He is like Shutramta. Shutramta is another name for Vayu, the thread passing through the entire universe. And just like the Atma here points to Paramatma, which is the Antaryami, which is witnessing everybody's thoughts and actions from within. He will also be aware of everyone's thoughts and actions. So this is referring to his competence as a king. It's not really referring to him as the incarnation of the Lord who's connected to Paramatma, but a competent king, he goes to great lengths to find out everything that is happening in his kingdom. We see that in Ramayana, that even though Lord Ram was widely loved and respected, but he still had an elaborate system of spies that were constantly moving around in the kingdom, trying to find what was going on, who was happy and unhappy. And it is through the spies only that it was reported to him that the washerman was chastising his wife, that she had lived away from him, and he said, I cannot accept you. I'm not like Lord Ram who will accept Sita. So it's one of the duties of the king to be aware of everything that is going on in the kingdom, and Prithu Maharaj will be an expert at it. But he will be neutral. So if he found out that somebody was negative towards him, he would not take it personally. Or if he found out that somebody was attached to him, again, he would not unduly favor that citizen. Verse 30. Nadanayam dandayatesha sutamatma dvishamapi dandayati atmajannapi dandayam dharma pathe stitaha. Since this king will always remain on the path of piety, he will be neutral to both his son and the son of his enemy. If the son of his enemy is not punishable, he will not punish him. But if his own son is punishable, he will immediately punish him. So here he is compared to dharma. So the nature of dharma is to have an intimate knowledge of the laws of dharma, and the most important quality is impartiality. So in order to demonstrate it, they say that because a father tends to be attached to one's own son and tends to be averse to an enemy, so they give this example, that if his own son does something wrong, he will punish him. But if the son of an enemy is innocent, he will not punish him. Prabhupada says these are the characteristics of an impartial ruler. King Prithu was so neutral that if his own son were punishable, he would not hesitate. On the other hand, if the son of the enemy were innocent, he would not engage in intrigue in order to punish him. Verse 14. Asya parateham chakram prithura manasa chala vartate bhagavan arko yavat tapati goganahe. Just as the sun god expands his shining rays up to the Arctic region without impedance, the influence of King Prithu will cover all tracts of land up to the Arctic region and will remain undisturbed as long as he lives. The previous verses, they were talking about the qualities of Maharaj Prithu. This verse talks about his influence. And Prabhupada says that the Arctic region is not visible to ordinary people. The sun shines there without impediment. Just as no one can check the sunshine from spreading all over the universe. So this is the Vedic view of the universe, that the sun spreads its light all over the universe, all the way to the Loka mountains. And the Loka mountains are so tall that they cut off the sunshine. And beyond the Loka mountains is the region of darkness. We'll study this in the next canto. So here the point is being made that his influence will be widespread and undisturbed. Prabhupada said the conclusion is that the sunshine and the sun god cannot be separated, nor could King Prithu and his ruling strength be separated. His rule over everyone would continue without disturbance. Thus, the king could not be separated from his ruling power. So Prabhupada is referring to the fact that King Prithu is a Palana Shakti of the Avesh avatar of Lord Vishnu. He essentially embodies the ruling potency. Different Shakti Vesh avatar, they embody different potency. Vyasdevi embodies the Gyan Shakti, Narad Muni embodies the Bhakti Shakti, and the four Kumars, the Yoga Shakti, Parshuram, the Dushtadaman Shakti. So Prithu Maharaj, he embodies the Palan Shakti. So Sri Prabhupada is bringing attention to the fact that he is the embodiment of the ruling potency and is therefore inseparable. Verse 15. Ranjayashyati allokam ayamatma vicheshitaha athamuma hurajana manoranjan kahay praja. The king will please everyone by his practical activities, and all of his citizens will remain very satisfied. Because of this, the citizens will take great satisfaction in accepting him as their ruling king. So the previous set of verses were talking about his opulences, his prowess, that he is powerful, that his enemies cannot stand him. His ruling potency will be widespread. He will be an expert in the politics of the kingdom. So all his prowess was being glorified. Now in 5 verses, from 15 to 19, the pleasing qualities of Maharaj Prithu will be glorified. So he is called Rajayati and Ranjayati. So Rajayati iti Raja, one who shines, and Ranjayati iti Raja is he will please the world by his activities which are pleasing to the mind. Right? So there are 2 ways, and here the latter meaning is used, Ranjayati iti Raja, that even though he will uh, uh, he will be extremely competent as a king, neutral as a judge, no partiality. But he will be so loving to his citizens that ranjayati, that he will they will simply adore him. Okay, verse 16. Dridvrata satyo sandho brahmanayo vrada sevakaha sharanya sarva bhutana manado deenavatsalaha. The king will be firmly determined and always situated in truth. He will be lover of the Brahminical culture and will render all service to all men and give shelter to all surrendered souls. Giving respect to all, he will always be merciful to the poor and innocent. So he is described as Satya Sandho. So Satya Sandho means true to promise, which means that if he says something, he will follow through. Promise doesn't mean that you formally say, now I promise. Satya Sandho just means that even in everyday dealings, the words uttered by the king will be true. And if they're words for future activities, he will make them come true. Satya Sandho. And then Dridvrata. So Dridvrata is being true to scriptural vows. The one is being true to your own words, and the second is being true to the words of the Vedas. He is glorified as both of them. Then he is also described as Vridha Sevaka. Prabhupada says that significant, Vridha means old man. There are two kinds of old men. One is old by knowledge and one is old by age. This Sanskrit word indicates that one can be older by advancement of knowledge. King Prithu was very respectful to the Brahmanas and he protected them. He also protected persons advanced in age. Whatever the king would decide to do, nobody would be able to stop. That is Dridha Sankalp or Dridha Vrata. So Dridvrata means being true to the Vedic injunctions. Dridvrata also means being true to your own vows. And Prabhupada indicates that Vrata, old, means either old by age or by knowledge. Like it is said that in Vaishnava tradition, there are three kinds of seniority. One is old by age, one is old by realizations, and one is old by initiation. So generally these three kinds of seniorities are used to determine Vrata. In the earlier days in ISKCON, the date of initiation was very key in establishing this seniority of devotees. One of the devotees was saying that one of his godbrothers was initiated like just a few weeks before him. But he would always make this point. And he said the thing was that he even accepted it. He would say that I am your senior godbrother, so you have to do what I say. And he was saying it was completely fine by him. He completely accepted it because the prevailing mood was very strong in terms of seniority by initiation. In the third canto, fifth chapter, Prabhupada writes about Maitreya Rishi. And he glorifies Maitreya Rishi as saying that he has great knowledge and experience. So when seniority by age is being glorified, then wisdom is being glorified. Because what age gives is experience. So a brahmachari may be an expert in the Vedas. He may have studied it, He may remember a lot of verses. He may continue to increase his knowledge. So he would be great in knowledge. But one who has had time to act upon that knowledge and have realizations based on that knowledge, then that is the second kind of greatness. So it is essentially Gyan and Vigyan. Right? So sometimes when people join an organization and they're coming from good schools, so they have a lot of knowledge. They've studied so much. Some of them are PhDs. They have a lot of theoretical knowledge. But they start at the bottom rung because they have Gyan but not Vigyan. And then as they work, they are able to apply the knowledge and get the understanding. So loosely speaking, Gyan is translated to knowledge and Vigyan to wisdom. In the Vaishnava tradition, it's generally translated to realizations. In the more conventional tradition, it's considered to be wisdom. And as Krishna says in the 10th canto of the Gita, that for his devotees, the maturing of the Gyan into Vigyan, it happens by his mercy. So his devotees don't necessarily have to go through repeated births and deaths, go through trials and tribulations. They don't have to commit sinful activities to understand the consequences of them. But by Krishna's mercy, they get deep realizations about it. Generally speaking, realization is predicated on activities. Right? That somebody goes through a difficult time, and then the difficult time gives the person many realizations, whether it's in terms of relationships, in terms of importance of wealth and body and health, depending on what the situation is. But devotees of Krishna, then Tesham Anukampa Partha, that by Krishna's mercy, he gives them the realizations. So they become as if they have experienced those and gotten the realizations out of them without having to actually go through them. Okay, verse 17. Matra bhakti parashis strishu patnyama devatmanaha parajasu pitravat snigta kinkaro brahmavadina. The king will respect all women as if they were his own mother. And he will treat his own wife as the other half of his body. He will be just like an affectionate father to his citizens. And he will treat himself as the most obedient servant of the devotees, who always preach the glories of the Lord. So two qualities are glorified here, that he will treat all women except his wife as his mother. Related to that is he treats his wife as the other half of his body, and he will not hanker after the wealth of others. So when it is said that he will be affectionate father, Vishwanath Chakravarti says that what it means also is that just like the father gets happy when the son becomes opulent, the father does not become envious and does not try to steal the wealth of the son. So similarly, Maharaj Prithu, he will be very, very affectionate for like an affectionate father to the citizens, not be envious of them, not hanker after their wealth. Srila Prabhupada writes a preaching purport. He says that the purpose of education is to instill such values. What one learns, one must be inspired to practice. So Prabhupada is a nice and a very relevant purport this aspect of um, what to learn and what to practice. Prabhupada says that a learned man treats all women except his wife as his mother, looks on others' property as garbage in the street, and treats others as he would treat his own self. These are the symptoms of a learned person described by Chanakya Pandit. So this appears in Niti Shastra, where Chanakya says, Matvat paradhareshu, paradarveshu lostravat, atmavat sarvabhuteshu, ya paschati sa pandita. That one who considers another's wife as his mother, another's possession as a lump of dirt, and treats all other living beings as he would himself, is considered to be learned. So Prabhupada continues that this should be the standard for education. Education does not mean having academic degrees. One should execute what he has learned in his personal life. These learned characteristics were verily manifested in the life of King Prithu. Although he was the king, he treated himself as a servant of the Lord's devotees. According to Vedic etiquette, if a devotee comes to a king's palace, the king would immediately offer his own seat to him. The word Brahmavadinam is very significant. Brahmavadi refers to the devotees of the Lord. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are different terms for the Supreme Brahma. Prabhupada saying Brahmavadi does not mean that he is only referring to the impersonalists, but Brahma is a common term that refers to the three aspects of the Lord, including the personal aspect. And Prabhupada says that in the Bhagavad Gita 10:12, Arjuna glorifies Krishna as Param Brahma Paradhama. Thus the word Brahmavadinam refers to the devotees of the Lord. The state should always serve the devotees of the Lord, and the ideal state should conduct itself according to the instructions of the devotees. So when it is said that Prithu considers himself to be a servant, it means that he is open to taking instructions and quickly following the instructions by the devotees of the Lord. And because of this, he is highly praised. So we see that in this purport, Prabhupada is talking about three types of education. In the Bhagavad Gita 4.1, Prabhupada in the purport says that the executive head of all states and all planets are obliged to impart this lesson to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. So he's talking about three kinds of education over here. So one is culture. So he referred to that in the purport as the quote of Niti Shastra from Chanakya Pandit, that a culturally sound person, he does not lust after the wives of others and does not lust after the wealth of others. And he treats others as he would treat himself. So this is called proper culture. Second is Gyan, knowledge, which essentially is how to deal with the self and the others from the perspective of body and soul. So in the previous aspect of education, there is no spiritual aspect. Essentially, it is moral aspect, how to be a moral person. So the second kind of education is knowledge. And knowledge here is Tattva Gyan, which is considering yourself as a soul with a body and considering others, other people and animals and living entities from that perspective. So this kind of knowledge is glorified in Bhagavad Gita in 13:35. Kshetra kshetra gyo eva antaram jnana chakshusha bhuta prakriti moksham cha ye viduryanti te param. That those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body can also understand the process of liberation from bondage and material nature attain the supreme goal. So body is the material aspect of existence. Knower of the body is the soul and the super soul. So Prabhupada says this is the second aspect of education, that one understands the difference between the body and the soul, the difference between the soul and the super soul. The third aspect of education is devotion. How to deal with one's approach to the personality of Godhead. So Prahlad Maharaj in the Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 5th chapter, 23-24, this famous verse he says, Shavanam Kirtanam Vishnu's Paranam Pada Sevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakyam Atmanivedam Iti Pumshar Pita Vishnu Bhaktis Cheneva Lakshana Kriyeta Bhagavati Adha Tanmaye Thitam Uttu. So Prabhupada talks about, not Prabhupada, sorry, Prahlad Maharaj talks about the 9 processes of devotional service. And then he concludes by saying that one who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada makes this point about how one's education is complete if it covers these 3 aspects. Now, really speaking, devotion is independent. In itself, it will make a person perfect. But the path to perfection can be long. So it is important to also create an environment that is conducive. And the duty of the devotees is also to inspire the others by their conduct. So a person who is properly situated, and we see that in the older education systems especially in India, where the education was actually channeled along these 3 directions. There was the cultural aspect, then there was the metaphysical aspect, and then there was the devotional aspect. Okay, so I'll do one more verse, and after that we'll pause for, I'll do 2 more verses. It's a logical stop after that, and pause for discussion. Dehinam prestha Surdam Nandivardanaha Mukta Sangha Prasangoya Dandapani Rasadusho. The king will consider all embodied living entities as dear as his own self, and he will always be increasing the pleasure of his friends. He will intermittently associate with liberated persons, and he will be chastising hand to all impious persons. So these are the intrinsic qualities that are being described of Prithu Maharaj, and each one of us, we come with our intrinsic qualities. It's called Swabhav. That this is our nature. It is what we have inherited because of the unique combination of the modes of material nature. Now, Swabhav can be changed. It can be changed materially also, but the most potent way of changing it is through the process of bhakti. So Prithu Maharaj is described as Nandi Vardhana, that he will increase the happiness in friends. And he will take the association of materially detached persons. Mukta Sangha. Mukta are those who are liberated. So he will take their association. So similar point made in the previous verse, where it is said, Atmavat Sarva Bhuteshu. So Prabhupada was quoting Chanakya Pandit there, Atmavat Sarva Bhuteshu. So in Bhagavad Gita 6:32, it is said that he is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings, both in their happiness and their distress. So this verse, it seems to talk about the opposite of that. He is not going to be equal, because he will take association of Mukta Sangha, but he will punish the impious. He will be increasing the pleasure of his friends, and he will be presenting the impious, punishing the impious, and he will be taking even more intimate association of the liberated persons. But it's a symptom of the equality of King Prithu, because he's reciprocating to the qualities of the persons in an objective way. That if a person is impious, then he needs to be punished. If the person is, just like in front of a judge, you cannot accuse a judge of partiality if he imprisons one person and frees another person. In fact, that is the symptom of his impartiality. That he simply looks at in the case of the judge, he looks at the situation. In case of Maharaj Prithu, he's simply looking at the qualities of the persons, and based on the qualities, he is in an undiscriminating way reciprocating. He is described as Deinam Atmavat Presta, that treating the others like one would treat the self. So Prabhupada says that in this age, however, so-called kings and presidents do not treat all other living entities as their own self. Most of them are meat eaters. And even though they may not be meat eaters and may pose themselves to be very religious and pious, they will allow cow slaughter within their states. Such sinful heads of state cannot actually be popular at any time. Another significant word in this verse is Mukta Sangha Parasangha, which indicates the king was always associating with liberated persons. Okay, one more verse and then we'll pause. Verse 19. Ayam tu sakshat bhagavam trayadisha kutastatma kalyavatirna yasmin avidya rachitam nirarkatham pashanti nanatvam api pratitam. The king is the master of the three worlds and is directly empowered by, it says this king is the master of the three worlds and is directly empowered by the Supreme Personality of God. He is without change, and he is an incarnation of the Supreme known as Shakti Veshavtar. Being a liberated soul and completely learned, he sees all material varieties as meaningless because of the basic principle in Nishayans. So, in the Lord, the sages, so essentially the suttas, they are repeating what the sages have told them. So in the Lord, the sages see variety made of ignorance to be insubstantial. Another way of saying, this is Vishwanath Chakravarti saying, another way of saying that they don't see any ignorance in the Lord. So the variety that is perceived in a dream by the imposition of the gross and subtle bodies on the jiva is completely meaningless. Similarly, the variety that will be seen in the king is completely meaningless. So it essentially drives the point home that the king will act in a way that will appear to be discriminatory. He will punish the enemies, he will be friendly to his friends, he will associate closely with the liberated people, he will serve the devotees. So it does not look like it's the activities of a Sam, one who has equal vision. But the sages here are saying that this is insubstantial variety, because he is essentially discriminating, not because he has difference in uh, how, not because he has differences within himself, but because he is reciprocating to the differences around him. So Prithu is glorified as Bhagwam's Triyadisha, the master of the three worlds, Bhagwam's Triyadisha. Factually speaking, Prithu Maharaj is not the master of the three worlds. He is master of the earth planet, which is part of the middle world. But again, the sages here are glorifying more his position as a Shakti Veshatta. So the Lord is the ruler of the three worlds. And because he is an incarnation of the Lord, they're glorifying that quality. Prabhupada writes that the reciters of these prayers are describing the transcendental qualities of Prithu Maharaj. These qualities are summarized in the word Sakshat Bhagwan. This indicates that Maharaj Prithu is directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead and therefore possesses unlimited good qualities. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, he enumerates the qualities of a liberated soul and compares them with a conditioned soul. And essentially he is answering relevant questions in the context of Prithu Maharaj. So Prithu Maharaj is a Shakti Vesh avatar of Krishna. So Prabhupada says, who is a Shakti Vesh avatar? And he says, one who is a Nitya Mukta. So we know that the Shakti Vesh avatar is a Jiva, but a Jiva that is eternally liberated. So one who is a Nitya Mukta. Then Prabhupada says, who is a Nitya Mukta? The essential quality of a Nitya Mukta is that he never forgets his position. So the Nitya Baddha is that they forget the position with respect to Krishna, but a Nitya Mukta is eternally aware of his position with respect to Krishna. So then what position? Prabhupada says two things. He knows that he is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and he also knows that he is the eternal servant of the personality of God. It means that he knows that he is spirit soul, and as a spirit soul, his position is to serve Krishna. Such a Nitya Mukta living entity represents the super soul as his expansion. That he is an expansion of the Supreme Nitya. So a Jiva who has these qualities is considered to be the expansion of the Supreme Nitya, which is another way of saying that such a personality is qualified to be a Shakti Veshatta. And what are the symptoms? Prabhupada says, being in such a position, he sees the material world with a different position. And he summarizes the vision of a Nitya Mukta as Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavi. So the 539, that he sees everything with equal vision. Now, on the flip side, the living entity who is Nitya Baddha or eternally conditioned, he sees the material varieties as being actually different from one another. So in other words, he considers the differences in the body to imply that they are different entities. So Prithu Maharaj, so many qualities have been glorified. He did not aspire for any of these qualities. They simply manifested in him as a symptom of his devotion to the Lord. So those who exclusively aspire for these qualities have a troublesome impact. For instance, more contemporary example that So we know that Mahatma Gandhi, he emphasized ahimsa. So he was exclusively aspiring for this quality of non-violence. But what was the result? It resulted in so much of violence. Because of his non-violence, the partition was done. Because of that, millions and millions of people were killed. This was because he was focusing on the quality, not on the underlying principle of Surdam Sarvabhutanam, being the well-wisher of all living entities, which can only come when one is properly connected to the Lord. So Prithu Maharaj was previously described as Dandapani, that when the need arose, he was quick to chastise. So therefore the qualities in themselves, they should not be a goal. They should be a tool. Like determination is a good quality, but if one says that I will be determined, then it becomes stubbornness. Right? In second chapter, Vyavasatmika Buddhi Ekaya Kuru Nandana, Krishna is himself glorifying determination, but in the connection of devotion. But if simply one says that, and there are people who are very, very determined, and they cause so much of trouble around them because they are in the determination as a material quality becomes stubbornness. And we see in Krishna that he has so many qualities, but the qualities themselves are not what Krishna was developing. So we see that Krishna sometimes joked, sometimes he was sober, politically sometimes he was very cunning, sometimes he was fierce in battle. He fought with Shalva, he chastised him with such severe words, he fought with Lord Shiva, he fought with Lord Indra. So it's not that one should try and develop these qualities that Krishna had. But what one should do is that develop that which resulted in these qualities. Now, Krishna, of course, is Krishna, but it is said these qualities are demonstrating his care for his devotees, Bhakti Vatsalya. So just like Krishna is Bhakti Vatsalya, that quality we can aspire to develop. And because of that, so many other qualities will happen. So this is the conclusion of the qualities of King Prithu, and that's where this point is made. One should not think that King Prithu, he went after each of these qualities and developed them, saying that now that I am a king, I should be like this, and I should be neutral. His essential quality was that he was, and that's where Prabhupada in the purport makes this point, that his essential quality was that he was Nityamukta. And being Nityamukta means that he was eternally situated in his position of service to Krishna. And because of that, all the other qualities develop. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, the 26 qualities of a devotee are mentioned. And then it is said that 25 qualities are Tathastha. And one of them is the root quality, which is devotion to Krishna. From that, all the other qualities, Kripalu, Akardoha, Satyasar, Sam, all the other qualities of being merciful and materially detached and all that, they all emanate from the quality of being surrendered to Krishna. In the fifth canto of the Bhagavatam, 8:12, it is said that all the demigods and the exalted qualities such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation become manifest in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the personality of Godhead. And Krishna himself says in the 11th canto to Uddhava that because of his unflinching devotion for me, he will not be defeated by sense gratification. Okay, so I'll summarize the qualities quickly. In verse 50, Ranjasyati, that he will act in a way that is pleasing to the mind of the citizens. Manoranjakaha, and the citizens, Manoranjaka is the minds will be pleased and they will be gladly calling him king. In verse 16, Dradravrata, fixed in vows, Satyasan, true to his promise, Brahmanyo, respectful to the Brahmanas, Brother Sevaka, rendering service to the elders, Sarvanya Sarva Bhutanam, protector of all beings, Mandaha, respectful of everyone, Dinavatsala, kind to the suffering. Verse 17, it is Dinavatsala is verse 17. Matra Bhakti Parashrashtu, that other than his wife, he will treat everyone like his mother. Patni Amardra Ivatmana, treat his wife as the half of his body. Paraishu Pitravat Snigdha, like a father, he will affectionate to his citizens. Kinkara Brahma Vadina, he will act as a servant to the devotees. Dehinam Atmavat Prastha, consider all beings as himself. Surdanandi Vardhana, that he will increase the joy of his friends. Mukta Sangha Prasagoyam, that he will intimately associate with Mukta Sanghas, the liberated persons. Dayada Paper Asadashu, punisher of the wicked. And Kalyavatrupa, that he will be the Shakti Veshatar of the Lord. Triyadisha, master of the three worlds. Kutastha, chainless. Avidya Rajita Nirkahim Pashanti, seeing all material varieties as meaningless because of the basic principle as nations. Okay, so pause here and any discussion that you would like to have on the topics?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandat Pranam, Prabhuji. I have two questions, Prabhuji. One, please clarify, Prabhuji, like you mentioned that aspiring for good qualities alone will actually do bigger harm. And you give a strong example like Mahatma Gandhi. So, because it seems to me aspiring for good qualities looks like a good thing to do. So where is the, because everybody in this world is not expected to become a devotee. So knowing this, everybody will not be interested in Krishna, but at least aspiring for good qualities, you know, it makes him a better person, and slowly there is chances of becoming devotee would increase over lifetimes. So thinking even in this perspective, where is the flaw, Prabhuji, like in aspiring to become good? This is one question, Prabhuji. And so where exactly is the mistake in the thought process? And the second question is, Prabhuji, like, please clarify if my understanding is correct. I am thinking that somewhere I missed it with the understanding. You mentioned that like being Nityamukta, that makes him the Shakti Avesh avatar of Krishna. Is that the correct understanding? Because here I was little bit stuck, because in spiritual world everybody or most of them, like, you know, Srila Prabhupada himself is a Nityamukta, but he always consider he is a devotee of Lord, but he never claimed that he is Krishna. So is my understanding correct, Prabhuji? Is being a Nityamukta one becomes an expansion of Krishna, or only Prithu Maharaj's case, he is a Nityamukta, but still at the same time, he got the mercy of Lord to the fullest extent in terms of ruling potency? How should we understand? These are two questions, Prabhuji.
So I think the second understanding is what Srila Prabhupada is trying to speak, that being a Nityamukta, Prithu Maharaj got the mercy of the Lord. So being a Nityamukta is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. So all the Shakti-based avatars are jivas that are liberated, but not all liberated jivas are Shakti-based avatars. In terms of the first question, the point that you're making is valid, that yes, we do want to encourage people to develop good qualities. The perspective over here is qualities that are eternally beneficial to the person. So if you look in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna glorifies the mode of goodness, but then he condemns the modes also. So the mode of goodness is good because it gives all the qualities of illumination, happiness, etc., etc. But then he says all the modes are bad. So the perspective over here is for one to develop devotion. Factually speaking, people who are highly moral, they find it very difficult to become devotees. If you go to south, there are Brahmanas over there, and they are very strong in their Brahmanical culture. They do whatever, Sandhya Vandam, 3 times bathing, recitation of the scriptures. And they are deriving so much pleasure from that, that when you go to them and say that surrender to Krishna because the material world is Dukhalyam, and then they say it's not Dukhalyam for me. Because what is the symptom of mode of goodness? Happiness, illumination and happiness. So they're experiencing that. Because it is material, it's temporary. So even though they may be experiencing it, but nevertheless, it's temporary. They may get elevated to heavenly kingdoms, experience it even more. But still, even if they go all the way to Brahmalok, Krishna says that everybody from Brahmalok down to the lowest planetary system is suffering. In that context, it is said that developing these good qualities is not the best thing. The example that I was using was not even in the mode of goodness. It was talking more in the mode of passion. That there are some people that exclusively try to develop a quality externally, either because of fame or desire for fame, or because of some prior conceptions. They develop this quality exclusively, but because it's an artificial, it's like you can plant a rose and water it, put good soil and flowers will come, or you can get good flowers and try and put them, and they may look good, but they will dry off. So Mahatma Gandhi was famous for his ahimsa, right? And his ahimsa caused so much. Srila Prabhupada speaks so much about how this quality of non-violence in Mahatma Gandhi was the cause of so much of suffering, not only during the time of independence, but even for posterity. Cause of so much suffering, we are witnessing that also. Prabhupada will say there is a need, when there is a need for a violence, and violence is dharma. So he wanted to be famous for his non-violence. He was famous for his non-violence. Like worldwide, he was famous for his non-violence. The other personalities were famous for the intellect, or were famous for the charitable activities. But because these are external qualities that they cultivate, they're mostly out of mode of passion. That they want to be known for those qualities. And the effect of the mode of passion is always misery. It results, it may be pleasing to begin with, but it ends in misery. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhuji. It clarified a very important point that it is good only to cultivate qualities, but the motive behind it is so important. And in our case, our primary goal is, like you mentioned, to surrender to Krishna, and other things they may come or as much as it can.
Right. All the qualities will manifest by themselves.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, thank you very much for the nice class, and it's very nice that your emphasis on using this quality as a tool, not as a goal, and that's what I was thinking. It's nice thing that I've never thought about it like that. And the discussion that pursued now also is wonderful. Quite often we take it as a goal, not as a tool, and that is how we have been programmed so far. To think like it as a tool to attain devotion to Krishna is a better way, is a nicer way to see these qualities, the purpose of the qualities. And I, as you mentioned, those who are in mode of goodness quite often don't take to devotion. And I have a very vivid example of my friend. One of my friend is a very good person, very good non-judgmental mode of goodness person, but cannot surrender to Krishna. Cannot. It's very difficult because their point is it's okay to be good without God. So that is their point. So anyway, so phone is ringing. It's going to be disturbing everybody. Sorry, Prabhu. Thank you very much for your wonderful class.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I see that Prabhupada, he quoted Chanakya Pandit a lot in many texts and anywhere, in many places. And what is the basis of, because we heard about Chanakya Pandit a lot, but we don't know too much about him. I know, there was a serial on him sometime, feature film. Can you just elaborate a little bit about him, if possible?
One reason why Prabhupada liked, so Chanakya Pandit was not a devotee. He was he was a politician. But he spoke from the scriptures. So the qualities, so the Niti Shastra, the aphorisms that he has, they're all basically teachings from the scriptures. And he had this ability to put them into nice, catchy words and explain them. So they were easily palatable. That's why Prabhupada quotes them. He was essentially a Brahmana, and he was the one who was instrumental in driving the Greeks out of India. So when Alexander had basically conquered India, so he returned back to Macedonia, and then he left his representatives, and they were ruling India. So India was under Greek rule for a while. And then Chanakya Pandit was the person, he cultivated Chandragupta Maurya. So he recognized in him very early on that he is a powerful warrior and submissive to him also. So he groomed him, he trained him, and through him, he basically drove the Greeks out of India. They were weakened also because Alexander had died by that time. But they had full control on India. And then under his guidance, Chandragupta became the emperor of what is considered to be one of the largest kingdoms of India. So all the way from north to the south, Indonesia, Bali. So he was ruling all that, and then his rule was considered to be very, very beneficial, primarily because of the guidance of Chanakya Pandit. And Chanakya Pandit, he was very politically savvy. So he would let Chandragupta rule, but he would take care of all this. He had the spy network. He would take care of all the intrigue that needed to be done. So it was considered to be a very potent partnership. That he was the brains and Chandragupta was the brawn, the strength.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Moving on, verse 20. Ayam bhuvo mandalam madhyade gopte kaviro naradevanata asthaya jaitram rathamat chapaha paryasaste dakshinato yatharkaha. The king, being uniquely powerful and heroic, will have no competitor. He will travel around the globe on his victorious chariot, holding his invincible bow in his hand and appearing exactly like the sun, which rotates in its own orbit from the south. So in 8 verses from 20 to 27, the suttas are giving the prediction about the future activities of Prithu Maharaj. So Prabhupada, in the purport, he says that the word Yatarka indicates that the sun is not fixed but is rotating in its orbit, which is set by the personality of Godhead. He quotes Brahma Samhita, Yasyagya Brahmati Samvrita Kala Chakra. The Himalaya mountains from which the sunrise is first seen is also known as Udayachal or Udyadri. It is herein indicated that Prithu Maharaj's reign over the world would cover even the Himalaya mountains and extend to the borders of all oceans and seas. In other words, his reign would cover over the entire planet. And then Prabhupada says that it's also significant that Prithu Maharaj is called Naradeva. That when a king is qualified and when he is ruling as an ideal king, then he is to be understood as a representative of God in the human form. Actually, he is considered to be God in human form. And we see that even Sanatana Goswami, he glorifies Nawab Hussain Shah as Naradeva, although he was a monk, because he was the king. Later on, we will see that despite all this influence, Prithu Maharaj, he will retire at the right time to make the Vanaprastha ashram famous. Verse 21. Asmai nirpalaha kila tatra tatra balim harishanti salokapala mamashyanta esham striyadirajam chakrayudham tad yashodarantyaha. When the king travels all over the world, other kings as well as the demigods will offer him all kinds of presentation. Their queens will consider him the original king, who carries in his hand the emblem of club and disc, and will sing of his fame. For he will be as reputable as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So because of the future activities of Maharaj Prithu, not only the other kings, but the demigods will also glorify. So here Prithu Maharaj is being addressed as Adi Raju. So that term is generally reserved for Lord Narayan as the original king. And Prabhupada explains that the king's duty is to personally supervise the distribution of wealth and maintenance of all living entities. If he does so, he will be as reputable as Narayan. As mentioned in this verse, Tad Yasha Prithu Maharaj was actually carrying with him the reputation of the personality of Godhead, because he was actually reigning over the world in that capacity. So that is why he's being called Adi Rajam, Nardeva, not because he's the personality of Godhead, but because he is reflecting those qualities of the personality of Godhead. Famous example Prabhupada would give is iron in a fire becomes fire, even though it is iron. Okay, verse 22. Ayam mahim gam dudehe diraja prajapati vrati karaha prajana yo lilayadrin swasharashakotya pindan samam gam akarod yatendraha. This king, this protector of the citizens, is an extraordinary king and is equal to the Prajapati demigods. For the living facility of all citizens, he will milk the earth, which is like a cow. Not only that, but he will level the surface of the earth with the pointed ends of his bow, breaking all the hills exactly as King Indra. The heavenly king breaks mountains with his powerful thunderbolt. So these 4 verses, 22 to 25, are actually spoken by the Devas and the Devapatnis. So in verse 21, previous verse, it was said that King Prithu will be glorified by the Devas and the wives. And then in these 4 verses, how they glorify, what they're saying glorification is given. So just like Indra with his thunderbolt broke the mountains. So this is the pastime that is described, that earlier on the mountains had wings and they could fly. And the problem was that because they were enormous, when they would land, they would cause a lot of damage to people and property. So then Indra, as a service to the people, with his thunderbolt, he cut off the wings of the mountains so that they could not fly. So Prithu Maharaj, he will level the mountains. So at his time, the earth was uneven with mountains and valleys. So he will level the mountains and make them suitable for habitation and irrigation. And he will also milk the earth as a cow. So this all will be described in the subsequent chapter as the future activities of Maharaj Prithu. Okay, verse 23. Vishurjayannaja gavam danu swayam yada charat kshamam avishayamajav tada niliyor dishideshya santo langulamudhyamya yatha mragendra. When the lion travels in the forest with its tail turned upward, all menial animals hide themselves. Similarly, when King Prithu will travel all over his kingdom and vibrate the string of his bow, which is made of the horns of goats and bulls and is irresistible in battle, all demoniac rogues and thieves will hide themselves in all directions. So the analogy is given of a lion. So when a lion is in pursuit of the prey, or when the lion is angry, then its tail becomes upward. It becomes erect and turned upwards. And when the other animals see the lion in that mood, then they flee. So Prabhupada says very appropriate to compare the powerful king to a lion. In India, Kshatriya kings are also called Singha, which means lion. Unless rogues, thieves, and other demoniac people in a state are afraid of the executive head who rules the kingdom with a strong hand, there cannot be peace and prosperity. And Prabhupada makes an interesting point. It is most regrettable when a woman becomes the executive head of a lion-like instead of a lion-like king. In such a situation, people are considered very unfortunate. So this is in the 70s, and at that time, Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. So in this book was Srila Prabhupada, he generally conveys eternal principles. Sometimes he speaks contextually. So when reading Prabhupada's purports, it is important to distill the eternal from the contextual principles. And because of this context, one can understand that what Prabhupada seemed to be saying may be different from what the principle that is being spoken about. So generally speaking, contextual points are made to support eternal principles. However, with time, the contextual points might change. So one should be aware of the application of this principle. So like in this case, because at that time the country was in a bad situation under the rule of the woman prime minister, Prabhupada uses that contextually as an example. It's not an eternal principle. And he's not saying that women can never be executive heads. Contextually, he's saying that, of course, he's not formally stating the context. The context is implicit, but contextually, he's saying that, look, there's a woman prime minister and look what has happened to the country. Now, if there was a woman prime minister who was a devotee and the country was in good shape, then Prabhupada would contextually say that a woman devotee is the best thing that can happen to. So these are not eternal principles that he's talking about. So many times people basically say Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada said that. It's important to distill these aspects. That it is he talking about a contextual principle, or is he talking about an eternal principle? Okay. Let's move to the next verse. Yesho swamedhan shatam ajahara saraswati pradurabhava rabhaviyatra aharshadhyasya hayam purandaraha shatakratulscharame vartamani. At the source of the river Saraswati, this king will perform 100 sacrifices known as Ashwamedha. In the course of the last sacrifice, the heavenly king Indra will steal the sacrificial horse. Esha swasadam sadmupavane sametya sanad kumaram bhagavantametam Aradhya bhaktya labhatamalam taj jnanam yato brahma param vidanti. This king Prithu will meet Sanat Kumar, one of the 4 Kumars, in the garden of his palace compound. The king will worship him with devotion and will be fortunate to receive instructions by which one can enjoy transcendental bliss. The Prabhupada says that even though Prithu Maharaj was the Shaktivesh avatar of Vishnu, he set an example of accepting a spiritual master, becoming a disciple, and taking instructions. So we say that, we'll later on see that Prithu Maharaj receives instructions from the Lord himself when the Lord appears in his sacrifice, receives instructions from Sanat Kumar, and also gives instructions but the instruction that he gives represents the disciplic succession. Thus, one can become fortunate and enjoy a blissful life even within this material world. In this verse, the verb vidanti is sometimes taken to mean understanding. Thus, when a person understands Brahman, or the supreme source of everything, he enjoys a blissful life. Verse 26. Tatra tatra girastasta iti vishruta vikramaha Shrosyanti atmashrita gataha prithur prithu parakramaha. In this way, when the chivalrous activities of King Prithu came to be known to the people in general, come to be known to the people in general, King Prithu will always hear about himself and his uniquely powerful activities. So in various places, famous words will be spoken by these women. So these verses are being, or the previous set of verses were recited by the Devas and their wives. So it is said that in various places, when these words will be spoken by these verses, then the glory of Prithu Maharaj will become famous. So Atmashrita means stories told by their own skills. And Vishwanath Chakravarti says that the verbs are in past tense, since when they glorified Prithu, the events had already occurred. So this is interesting example of future past tense. So these activities have not occurred, but what the suttas are saying, that these women will glorify in the future the activities of Maharaj Prithu that he has already performed in the past. Prithu Prithu Parakrama. So the first Prithu refers to Prithu Maharaj. The second Prithu refers to widespread. And Parakrama means his Parakram, his activities. Prabhupada says to artificially advertise oneself and thus enjoy a so-called reputation is a kind of conceit. Prithu Maharaj was famous amongst the people because of his chivalrous activities, Parakrama. He did not have to advertise himself artificially. One's factual reputation cannot be covered. By nature, one does not need to advertise one's qualities because they are like fire. They're automatically observed and glorified. And Prabhupada says that one should not actually artificially advertise. Now, sometimes devotees, they do advertise, like we see when in YouTube, sometimes they're giving classes. So they advertise devotee for 20 years and studied scriptures for like this and that. So they advertise. And this also sometimes has the potential of attracting negative popularity. So better to become locally famous, not by advertising, but by service. So I was noticing that there's a famous devotee from Chowpatty. I forget his name. I think Gaur Gopal or something like that. He's very witty and he speaks very, very charismatic, very, very humorous also. And just by looking at, so I was hearing one of his lectures on YouTube. He has like millions of hits on his lectures. So then I was trying to see what else he has spoken. And then I noticed that another devotee had also recorded a YouTube video criticizing this devotee. And he had taken snippets of what he had said, and then he was saying this is shastrically incorrect. And he had taken snippets from different lectures and saying these are in contradiction to one another. He had obviously spent a lot of time. So, better to become locally famous. So locally famous means that small group of people around you, don't advertise yourself. They see the qualities that you have, they appreciate it, creates a nice sangha. But being widely famous, it has the potential of developing pride. It attracts negative attention also. So it's not really a scriptural tattva, just a practical aspect of for practicing devotees. Okay, so we have one more verse, and that's the end of the chapter, verse 27. Tisho vityapra tirudha chakraha swate jasotpatita lokashalya sura surende upkiyamana mananubhavo bhavita patir bhava. No one will be able to disobey the orders of Prithu Maharaj. After conquering the world, he will completely eradicate the threefold miseries of the citizens. Then he will be recognized all over the world. At that time, both the suras and the asuras will automatically glorify his magnanimous activities. So Prithu will be the only emperor ruling over all the subsidiary states and will maintain the Varnashram system. He will completely approve the threefold miseries, the Adibhautik, Adidevik, Adhyatmik. And he will set an example for others, which means that those who aspire to uphold the threefold miseries will follow his example. And the point again is made over here that the fame of Prithu Maharaj is a secondary result. So it's not that he aspired to become famous, but he acted in a way that fame came by itself. And we see that in case of devotees also. There are some devotees that actually became famous after their death. Like Bivamangala Thakur, he was not very famous when he was living. And after his death, he became more famous. His poetries became famous. The 6 Goswamis, they were very famous even while they were living, but not because they sought the fame, but because their conduct was so exemplary. So one of the things that we can get from Prithu Maharaj is this correlation between spirituality and the material qualities. So even though spirituality is non-material, so initially Prabhupada talked about culture, knowledge, and spirituality, and he encouraged all three. And then a devotee might say, all I need is Krishna Prema. I don't need anything else. I don't need culture. I don't need to have culture. I don't need to have knowledge, just Krishna Prema. So yes, spirituality is non-material, but it needs to be received in the vessel of culture. So Mahaprabhu is described as Sima. Sima means lion. But then it is also said to hold the milk of a lion, one needs a vessel that is made of gold. That vessel is culture. When Srila Prabhupada first met Bhakti Charu Maharaj, and Bhakti Charu Maharaj was almost a boy, very young man at the time, and Prabhupada said, person of culture. So he appreciated the culture. So one should be properly situated in in culture. And we can see that demonstrated in the qualities of Prithu. Now, in case of Prithu, he was a Nitya Sadhaka, a Nitya Siddha, sorry. But in case of sadhakas like us, culture becomes the vessel in which spirituality is practiced. So Prabhupada has a purport that kind of summarizes the qualities and the position of Prithu Maharaj. So I'll end over here and see if we have discussion. Yes, Prabhu, you had a point?
Yeah, it does not say too much information about Indra came to steal the horses, no, in the sacrifice.
There's a whole chapter for that.
Later.
Later, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll end here. Vanchakalpatarubhayascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.